he's the John Kirby of the Defense Department, to allow American contractors on the ground in Ukraine. Now, these contractors are typically former military who work for military, private American companies. They're not going to have American uniforms on, but they're going to have camouflage on them. They're going to be armed. They're fair targets for the Russians. How dangerous is that?
I'd make 2 points. One is that it is a form of escalation. The United States is upping the ante, and this is something that should naturally worry all of us. Second point, and I think the more important point is it all depends on how effective they are at shifting the balance of power in the war. If we put significant numbers of contractors in who begin to help the Ukrainians in a meaningful way on the battlefield, and the balance of power on the battlefield shifts against the Russians, I believe the Russians will escalate in a serious way.
And Americans will die.
Well, these Americans are going to die from the beginning. If you're putting contractors in there, they're fair game. I mean, I would be shocked if the Russians don't go after the contractors. Remember what the Russians said about putting French troops in Ukraine. They said very clearly that as soon as those French troops cross the border into Ukraine, they're fair targets.
Right.
And the Russians would be crazy not to go after those contractors. So the potential for escalation is real here. But again, my second point, which is I think the more important point, is a lot depends on just how effective the contractors are. This is the same point I make with regard to the ATACMS. The ATACMS, putting ATACMS in the hands of the Ukrainians is escalatory for sure. But the key question is how effective are those ATACMS at affecting the progress of the war? And I think the ATACMS are not very effective, and therefore escalation is kept under control. But if all of a sudden those ATACMS looked like they were a war-winning weapon, you can rest assured that the Russians would escalate in a serious and dangerous way.
Switching gears to Israel and Gaza, since last we spoke, I mean, the Trump campaign hasn't announced this, but the New York Times has, that Mrs. Sheldon Adelson has deposited or promised to deposit $100 million in the account of a political action committee controlled by Trump's people. One could only imagine what she thinks she's buying if Donald Trump becomes president.
Yeah, I mean, the evidence up to this point is that what she's interested in is seeing the Israelis annex in a formal way the West Bank. They've annexed it in a de facto way, but she'd like to see it annexed formally. So the story goes, and that she thinks that by contributing to Trump's campaign and hopefully from her point of view to Trump's victory, that this will give him a powerful incentive to go along with the Israelis in his next term in office, should he win, and then push with Israel to formally annex the West Bank.
Have you ever seen the donor class be so brazen as Mrs. Adelson?
Well, I think the donor class has been remarkably brazen since October 7th. It's truly remarkable, in my opinion, how out in the open and how brazen the donor class is. You see this especially with regard to universities and the fact that the donor class played the principal role in overthrowing the president at Harvard University and the president at the University of Pennsylvania. I never dreamed I would see something like this in my lifetime. It's truly stunning. And it just shows you how much trouble Israel is in. Israel needs to be defended by the lobby, and the task that the lobby faces is monumental. And as a result, they're pulling out all stops, and therefore they are behaving in very brazen ways when it comes to throwing their influence around in the American political system.
Here's how much trouble Israel's prime minister believes Israel is in. This is Prime Minister Netanyahu speaking to his senior staff. It's a little paranoid, I think, but you can give me your views. Just 2 hours ago, Professor.
And Iran is fighting us on a seven-front war. Obviously, Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthis, the militias in Iraq and Syria, Judea, Samaria, West Bank, Iran itself. They'd like to topple Jordan, and their goal is to have a combined ground offensive from various fronts, coupled with a combined missile bombardment. We have to, we've been given the opportunity to scuttle it, and we will. The first requirement is to cut that hand, Hamas. People who do this thing to us are not going to be there. And we'll have a long battle. I don't think it's that long, but we'll get rid of them. We also have to deter the other elements of the Iran terror axis. But we have to deal with the axis. The axis doesn't threaten only us, it threatens you. It's on the march to conquer the Middle East. Conquer the Middle East. Conquer. That means actually conquer. Conquer Saudi Arabia, conquer the Arabian Peninsula. It's just a question of time. And what's standing in their way is the small Satan, that's us, on the road to the middle-sized Satans, that's the Europeans. They're always offended when I tell them that. You're the great Satan, not them. Okay, and we have to stop them.
Mearsheimer, is there any evidence that Iran wants to conquer Saudi Arabia?
No, no.
What does he talk? What is he talking about?
Well, he is right in the sense that Israel faces multiple threats. Israel's strategic situation is quite dire at this point in time. You just want to understand that. And it's in good part due to the policies of Prime Minister Netanyahu and his predecessors. But you want to remember, he talks about defeating these adversaries in a decisive manner. He's talked for a long time about decisively defeating and eliminating Hamas. He's failed. Hamas is still alive and functioning in Gaza, and there is no chance that he's going to finish Gaza off. So he has not gotten the job done. And with regard to Hezbollah, the idea that he's going to march into Lebanon and finish off Hezbollah the way he promised to finish off Hamas is another pipe dream. It's not going to happen. Hamas is going to remain a formidable adversary. Hezbollah is going to remain a formidable adversary. And furthermore, there is a serious danger now that Iran, which is a formidable adversary, is going to get nuclear weapons. And furthermore, the Houthis are developing missiles and rockets that have the capability to hit Israel. So Israel faces threats on all fronts. It is not a good strategic situation for any country to be in. And Netanyahu has no way of getting out of this disastrous situation.
Is he a madman? Is he doing this just to stay in office? Doesn't he realize the, I'll use your phrase, realism of what you just articulated?
I don't think he's a madman. I wouldn't use rhetoric like that. I think he's strategically foolish. I think that he has long believed that Israel, with the full support of the United States, could work hand in hand to deal with any possible threats that Israel faces. And he placed a very heavy premium on using military force, both Israeli military force and American military force, to deal with those problems. And the fact is that Israel has reached the point where using its military and even the American military to deal with those threats just doesn't buy you very much. This is the point I made about Hamas. Israel, with full support from the United States, was not able to defeat Hamas. It's not going to be able to defeat Hezbollah. And if Iran decides it's going to develop nuclear weapons, there's nothing Israel and the United States can do to prevent that. This tells you that Israel is in deep trouble.
We are looking at a tape released by the Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guard showing their people training coming out of tunnels in Hamas. They're on motorcycles. They're not in tanks or armored personnel carriers. Are they itching for a fight with Israel?
I do not think that Iran itself is itching for a fight with Israel. I think that the Iranians would not mind seeing Israel get its nose bloodied by Hezbollah the same way it's gotten its nose bloodied by Hamas. But the Iranians do not want a direct conflict with Israel. And you remember, we've talked about this before. After the Israelis attacked the Iranian embassy in Damascus on April 1st,
Right.
the Iranians then retaliated on April 14th. And the Americans coordinated with Iran before that attack on April 14th to keep it limited. And then when the Israelis retaliated against Iran on April 19th, we went to great lengths to keep that retaliation by Israel as limited as possible. And the reason is both the United States and Iran do not want a war between themselves. And they have gone to great lengths since October 7th to avoid a war. So I don't see Iran as anxious to pick a fight with the United States or with Israel directly. But this is not to deny for 1 second that the Iranians are surely very pleased to see Israel fighting on multiple fronts and not doing very well at all.
Is the Zionist experiment in danger?
I think there's no question that the Zionist experiment is in danger. And you see all sorts of pieces in the Israeli press talking about that. What the future holds is very hard to say. But when you look at the threat environment that Israel faces, which I just described,
Right.
you look at the centrifugal forces at play inside of Israel, one really wonders what the future holds for Israel. There are huge and powerful cleavages inside that society. And there's no evidence that those cleavages are going to go away. People often talk about two Israels that are in effect at war with each other. When you look at the relations today between the IDF, the Israeli military on one side, and Prime Minister Netanyahu on the other side, it's really quite shocking how terrible the relations are. Prime Minister Netanyahu's wife recently said that she believes that the IDF, the army, is out to effect a coup against her husband.
Hmm.
Uh, and there's just all sorts of evidence inside of reserve units in the Israeli military that when they are calling up reservists for a second and third time now, many reservists are refusing the call up. They will not go back on active duty and go to Gaza or maybe at some point go into southern Lebanon. There's just huge dissatisfaction in the military with the political leadership. So there are big problems ahead inside this country. And again, they face a really wicked threat environment that's only going to get worse with time.
Maybe this question is too early in our happy relationship to ask, but where do you think World War III will start? In Russia/Ukraine, in Israel, in the Middle East, or, this is a Mearsheimer question, in the South China Sea?
I don't think you're going to get World War III. And I think, given the fact that we live in a nuclear world, I think in the final analysis, it's highly unlikely, extremely unlikely, that you will have anything approximating World War II or World War One. I think for sure you could have a shooting war between the United States and China in the South China Sea. And the United States could get involved in Ukraine, and the United States and Russia could be involved in a great power war. But I don't see it escalating into a world war that's fought across the three big theaters that are now at play, the Middle East, Eastern Europe, and East Asia. I just don't see that. And I think the fact that we live in a nuclear world makes it highly unlikely that you would have significant escalation. I think if shooting started between any two great powers, there would be real limits on how far each side would go. And there would be rather rapid movement to shut the conflict down because of the threat of mutual annihilation. I may be too optimistic in my prognosis, but that's sort of my best guesstimate on, what the future holds. The sort of what is the worst case scenario for the future.
I guess that's what I was asking you, is the worst case scenario from the prophet of realism. But Professor Mearsheimer, thank you so much, my dear friend. It's always a pleasure. We have a short week next week. I hope we can find time where you can join us again midweek.
Likewise.
Thank you. All the best.